Thank you, Margaret, and also thank you, Karina, Chair of the Kate Sheppard Memorial Trust, and also Lianne, who's really gone to a lot of effort to make this happen. Lianne was the one that actually originally sent an email trail around sort of saying, can't we get together and liberate the Kate Sheppard National Memorial? And I think the point was made was that it was a national memorial, and that's what makes it so vitally important that it was liberated. And a lot of buildings, of course, got completely tied up in what's called a fall zone. I don't know if anyone had heard of a fall zone before February 2011, but the fall zone was the reason why it was blocked off. And so when Lianne first sent the email, we got in touch with the right department within the City Council and said, is it possible to make this happen? And we determined an appropriate date would be March the 8th, International Women's Day. And you might remember that on March the 5th we had a rather large storm event. In fact, the largest amount of rainfall in decades, over a very short period of time. And that put a huge amount of pressure on that particular department. And so we said, look, lighten the load, make sure that you've got your focus on the other things, but they still got it cleaned up and ready to go. But we weren't able to really commit with the flood that came right the way through. I think some of you have seen the photographs of how the waters came right through into this area. So it's great to be able to find another date, and so this will be an important date for us to remember. The 8th of June is a date that we've all gathered here today to liberate this particular memorial. And as we've heard, Dame Catherine Tizard, I think our first woman Governor General, appropriately unveiled the original, unveiled it originally on September the 19th, 1993 as the centennial celebration. This was commissioned by Women Towards 2000 and sculpted by, now I'm just going to do the name here, I haven't met her, so Margriette Windhausen, is that? Yeah, but is that the correct pronunciation? So, and again, a wonderful relief. So I'm going to introduce you to the women on the memorial. So, because of course we all know Kate Sheppard, but the other women are equally important because they represent different parts of the whole movement. So this is Meri Tetai Mangakahia of Tetai Tokoro, who requested the vote for women from the Kotahitanga Māori Parliament. So she had a very important role in our history. Amy Daldy, a foundation member of the Auckland Women's Christian Temperance Union and president of the Auckland Franchise League. Kate Sheppard of Christchurch, as we know, the leader of the suffrage campaign. And Ada Wells, also of Christchurch, who campaigned vigorously for equal educational opportunities for girls and women. Helen Nicole, who pioneered the Women's Franchise Campaign in Dunedin, and another Dunedinite, Harriet Morrison, Vice President of the Tailoresses Union and a powerful advocate for working women. So aren't they a wonderful combination? I think they were selected in order to give that flavour of all elements that came together to make this happen. And as you've heard, the history's inscribed on the panel, so I won't read them all out, but I've made some notes from them so that we can just touch on the highlights. So on the 19th of September 1893, New Zealand women won an historic victory, the right to vote in parliamentary elections. New Zealand became the first self-governing country in the world to recognise this freedom for all women. And in 1887, Kate Sheppard of Christchurch was appointed superintendent of the franchise department of the Women's Christian Temperance Union and led an intensive 7-year campaign. And I thought that was a great story too, the fact that this wasn't something that just happened overnight. It was an extensive campaign. And of course she inspired many women to join this cause of liberty and justice, and these are the words. Now this is not inscribed on the panels, but I thought I'd read out the pamphlet that she wrote in 1888, which set out the 10 reasons to give women the vote. Now some of the party politicians won't like some of her ideas at the time, but I thought that they were worthy of reading out on this auspicious occasion. Because a democratic government like that of New Zealand already admits the great principle that every adult person not convicted of crime nor suspected of lunacy has an inherent right to a voice in the construction of laws which we must all obey. 2, because it has not yet been proved that the intelligence of women is only equal to that of children, nor that their social status is on a par with that of lunatics or convicts. 3, because women are affected by the prosperity of the colony, are concerned in the preservation of its liberty and free institutions, and suffer equally with men from all national errors and mistakes. Because women are less accessible than men to most of the debasing influences now brought to bear upon elections, and by doubling the number of electors to be dealt with, women would make bribery and corruption less effective as well as more difficult. Because in the quietude of home, women are less liable than men to be swayed by mere party feeling, and are inclined to attach great value to uprightness and rectitude of life in a candidate. Well, I think Megan and Ruth are okay in that regard. Because the presence of women at the polling booth would have a refining and purifying effect. Because the votes of women would add weight and power to the more settled and responsible communities. Because women are endowed with a more constant solicitude for the welfare of the rising generations, thus giving them a more far-reaching concern for something beyond the present moment. I love that one. Because the admitted physical weakness of women disposes them to exercise more habitual caution and to feel a deeper interest in the constant preservation of peace, law and order, and especially in the supremacy of right over might. And finally, because women naturally view each question from a somewhat different standpoint to men, so that whilst their interests, aims and objects would be very generally the same, they would often see what men had overlooked, and thus add a new security against any partial or one-sided legislation. So they are the 10 reasons why women should have the right to vote, as written in 1888. So opposition was pretty fierce, you might imagine, at the time. The campaign produced 3 major petitions, 1891, 1892, and of course the one we all know in 1893. That one with 31,872 signatures. Could you imagine getting a petition of 31,872 signatures today, even with the benefits of social media? Hard to sort of challenge up that number of signatures, but you know, it was the largest ever gathered in Australasia, and it was, you know, done by bicycle and door knocking, and you know, it was just really quite a different kettle of fish. A leading suffrage supporter, Sir John Hall, presented the 1893 petition to Parliament during the debate on the electoral bill. The bill giving women the vote was finally passed with a majority of 2. And of course women rejoiced in their hard-won victory, and it actually wasn't, it was extraordinary really, because they got on the roll. The election was 2 months after the law was changed, and yet 70% exercised their new right to vote. So it was an extraordinary time. And after the vote was won, a Women's Christian Temperance Union editor wrote, and this is on here as well: "We, the mothers of the present, need to impress upon our children's minds how the women of the past wrestled and fought, suffered and wept, prayed and believed, agonised and won for them the freedom they enjoy today." And I think that's really probably the most important message that we can take from today. And today is an opportunity to give thanks to Kate Sheppard and her fellow suffragists who have helped define our city's place in our nation's history. It is not surprising that Christchurch went on to produce the first woman MP, Elizabeth McCombs, and the first woman Cabinet Minister, Mabel Howard. Although it's not without its challenges, New Zealand's journey to universal suffrage was essentially dignified, peaceful and democratic, which can be contrasted with the distress and the violence and disruption which characterised the change in the United Kingdom. And I think it's on that note that I think we could issue a challenge today to build on the lessons we've learned as a city as a result of our recent experience along with this history. When I left Parliament, my staff gave me this necklace, and some of you will have heard me comment about it before. The big bead says, "The most courageous act is still to think for yourself," aloud. Yeah, very, very important quote from Coco Chanel, and that usually gets a laugh. But but the point is that it's so true. Sometimes having the courage to say